I need your help. We need to go debunk the Shroud of Turin.
You said I could see my family today.
That was before I needed something, Morty. People are wrong on the internet. If I get it, I'll be awesome.
We've been going non-stop, Rick. It's not healthy.
Oh, wow, Morty. Wow, what an exciting life you lead. Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
What's up, skeptics? Welcome to another episode of Reason to Doubt, your source for all things skeptical. I'm Jordan. With me today, of course, is Jared, and we are exhausted because this is episode 3 of our one-part series on the Shroud of Turin. If you don't know what the Shroud of Turin is, you should go check out parts 1 and 2. It's a ancient linen that allegedly has Jesus' image on it. So that's what it looks like right there. And we've spent the last month of our lives debunking this. I don't know about you, Jared. I did not anticipate just how much there was to talk about on the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, I didn't either. I thought it was just a couple like, oh, this is the image. It's either it was painted or it wasn't painted. I didn't realize there was a whole scientific field devoted to the authenticity of the shrouds.
Right. It's, yeah, but now we know, and you get to benefit from our pain. So episode 1, we went over the radiometric dating and other forms of possible dating methods. Episode 2, the last episode, we talked about the image, how it might have been formed. And so today we're going to talk about the rest. Mostly we're going to talk about the history of the shroud and can we use historical data to pull it further back in time from where it shows up according to the radiometric dating and some other kind of miscellaneous grab back things.
Yeah, this episode will be a little bit less scientific and a little bit more art historian, textile kind of episode.
Yeah, not just because of the topic. It's the other 2 episodes. There's a lot of work being published on those topics. There's not a lot of peer-reviewed work being published on these topics that we're going to get into, the art history and things like that. I couldn't find any at all about a lot of these things. And that's not great because I am not an art historian. I'm not an expert in this. Jared, I know you majored in history in college in your undergrad.
Yep.
But you're also not a historian. Neither of us are qualified to be an authority on this topic. So we, at the same time, we think that the process of skepticism belongs to everybody. Anybody can do it. Even if you're religious, you can be a religious skeptic. That's fine. And you don't need to be an expert to be a skeptic. What you do need is to know how to find the experts and how to listen to what they say and how to differentiate between who is an expert and who isn't. So we've had a list of citations in each of our videos. We'll have one here, and we're going to do our best to highlight where we found the information and maybe some limitation to them as we go along the way.
Another important thing to point out here too is that you don't always have access to experts, or experts don't always publish on the thing that you're trying to research. So you can still apply the tools of skepticism, get the best information you can, and then make a decision based on that information, right? So
exactly. So the Shroud in history, you'll have heard this a couple times if you've watched the other 2 videos, but the undisputed history of the Shroud starts in 1352. In France, it shows up in the possession of one Geoffrey de Charnay. He is was a French knight, and he kept it in a chapel that he built in the town that presumably he ruled over, Raes, in southeast of Paris. And so that's almost certainly the Shroud, for sure 100% the Shroud when he put it on display about 30 years later in 1389. And from 1389 onwards, we have a pretty good idea of who had the Shroud at what time and what happened to it. Like we have a pretty good record from there on. So 1352 forward, we know where it was and what was happening. 1352 back, very fuzzy, right?
It's important, right?
Right. Yeah. So that actually is about when the radiocarbon dating puts it in history, coincidentally. So what we're going to do today is let's dig into some sources that proponents claim show that radiocarbon dating is false, starting with the most famous and the most popular one you'll see anytime you're digging into the Shroud. You're going to see this one talked about, the PROBABLE Codex.
So the Hungarian Prayer Codex, which is actually pray, not prayer codex. A lot of times you'll hear people on the internet saying it's a prayer codex. That's not what it is. It's actually
I'm probably going to say that because it flows way more
yeah.
naturally.
It's actually the guy who discovered its name was Georgi Prey. I don't know how to pronounce his first name. It was
He's Hungarian.
discovered, yeah, in 1770. And so it's just a manuscript that has a bunch of various topics in it throughout, religion and history related to Christianity,
And just Hungarian history.
and Hungarian history as well, right? Which probably has a lot of Christianity history in it. But it also dates to it's dated to about the 12th century.
The
And
late 12th century, like
the late 12th century.
1190-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple people you'll see the dates 1192, 1195 thrown around. Doesn't matter for our purposes. 1190 circa is perfect because why?
That would put it outside the lower bound of the radiocarbon dating. Radiocarbon dating, the oldest age was 1260. If this was indeed the shroud and it was there in 1190, that is another ding against that radiocarbon
Yeah.
dating.
That is probably the biggest reason that the Hungarian Prayer Codex comes into the conversation for the Shroud of Turin, because it proves that it showed up in history prior to that dating. So it
Right.
calls into question the dating, which is important if you're trying to say, well, that dating doesn't work. And also important to say, well, it's obviously throughout history. So
Okay.
what exactly is this thing that we're talking about here?
So there are the Prayer Codex is a illuminated manuscript, which means the person writing it drew pictures sometimes and made it nice and pretty.
Mhm.
And one picture in particular is the one that we're interested in. This is a picture of Jesus, his death, and then the visitation of the tomb by the three Marys. So this is it. It's blown up in the actual book. It was small. I mean, it's not like teeny tiny, but it's not huge either. Like he wasn't writing on a big canvas. Okay.
Yeah.
And
this is
so
actually split up into two parts. So you have an upper part and a lower part.
right, they're right there together on the page, but the image or miniature, as it's referred to, has the two parts. The top part has the anointing of Jesus, so you can see there Jesus, presumably Joseph of Arimathea, and others are like anointing the body and preparing it for burial. And then in the bottom part, you have the three Marys arriving at the tomb. Jesus isn't there, and there's an angel there, which is common. This is a common motif in medieval artwork.
Mhm.
So the features of this image there are features of this that are claimed by Shroud proponents to be so unlikely to have occurred on their own that the only reasonable conclusion is that the artist who made this Prayer Codex was copying the Shroud of Turin, had like either was looking at it or had seen it or was like in some way influenced directly or indirectly by the Shroud. Right. So this is a scene that happens everywhere, but they're going to say these specific details show that they were looking at the Shroud when they did this one.
I mean, just look at it. It's identical to the Shroud, right? So
I mean, identical, obviously. So
well, a couple key features, right? So we have no thumbs on Jesus's hand.
So yeah, if you look at the top, Jesus' hands are like on his groinal area there. No thumbs on his hands.
He's also naked, which is important because Jesus is naked in the Shroud. So
and it's unusual.
Yeah, it is unusual. A lot of times Christians are very modest, so they would cover Jesus up with either a loincloth or some sort of, either he'd be in the burial cloth itself. A couple other key features on this is the zigzag pattern in the circles in the what they call the shroud, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then the burn holes,
right, which are more circles. So
more circles.
There's a lot of amateur opinions on this and a couple experts who have opined on it, but I couldn't find anything in the way of peer-reviewed articles by experts in relevant fields. There was an article by Casabianca kind of surveying what people had said, but he was surveying, even by his own admission, amateurs among others, and there wasn't much peer-reviewed stuff there. So
yeah, there's actually a quote from that paper. He's like, expert, amateur, expert. I'm like, wait a second here.
And he does quote a few books or papers. They were all in French, and I don't speak French, and also Google Translate wouldn't translate them for me. So if it's not English, it doesn't count as science.
Yeah.
Maybe those papers are great. I can't assess them because I have no access to them. So we're just going to go with what we got. Starting with the thumbs.
Let's start with the thumbs. So let's get a big out close up of this, and we're actually going to use the photo positive of this so that way we can get a better picture, because it's really faint. Sorry, the negative. And people got us on that for the first one. And then anyways, We're going to look at the black and white image because it's easier to see the contrast, so you can see the
Right.
the lack of thumbs.
So you can see here the way that I'm going to call this person Jesus, see whether whatever the person on the shroud who's supposed to be Jesus, the way his hands are laying, his thumbs are not visible. Presumably they're underneath his hands in some way, and they're folded about where his groin would be. Now, according to proponents, because the Codex also has his hands folded like that, and you can't see his thumbs, that shows that they were dependent on each other. This seems to be a pretty thin read. So, according to Casabianca, who again is a prodigious shroud proponent, he is in favor of shroud's authenticity. Byzantine artists, and this would have been painted in the Byzantine Empire from that area, they often in this period didn't show thumbs. It was just kind of an artistic choice. Not always. And even in the Codex, you can see some of the people do have thumbs, but it wasn't uncommon for them to not show thumbs, right?
If you even look in the Codex itself, on the same image, there are people in here who don't have thumbs. So.
Some have thumbs, some don't.
Some don't, yeah.
Right. So sometimes you feel like a thumb, right? So, and they even omit it sometimes when it would make sense anatomically for it to be there. And so remember, what we have to be establishing is not that they are similar, but that they are so similar in such an odd way that it couldn't have happened by chance. Because you have to remember, there are hundreds, thousands of images of this scene. They're going to have similarities. They need to be distinctive in some way, right? Okay, so moving on from the thumbs, Jesus is naked. Now, as we point out, art historian Thomas de Wesselow makes a lot of this. It's uncommon for pictures of the time to show that Jesus was naked. Both the Shroud and Codex do so, right? Okay, so that is true, and it is a point of crossover they have that is rare among art. So this is probably the best point that they have, I think. But they also want to put the hands being crossed over the groin as a separate point. So Jesus is naked, they'll say, is one point of agreement. Hands crossed over the groin is another point of agreement. In my mind, those are both the same point, right?
Right, because they're obviously covering up Jesus's Pepe, right?
Right, yeah. Like if so, if you're if you're the Codex artist and say that you chose, even if you don't know the shroud is around, you're not basing on the shroud, whatever, you chose to paint Jesus naked. Where are you going to put his hands up? You're not going to have Jesus's penis hanging out on your Codex, right? On your little book manuscript. You're not going to show Jesus' dick on your manuscript. So
no,
there's
man,
only
you gotta
one.
have his hands like up on his head, like flaunting.
Hey.
Hey.
I mean, he is pretty ripped. He's definitely gone to the gym quite a bit. So no, so that's obviously the only place you'd put the hands. So that is a gimme. If he's naked, that's where his hands are going to be. But he is naked, so point to them.
Right. Well, that's not the most clear thing that I think, or their biggest argument. I think their biggest argument comes down to the weaves and the burn holes, right? So if we actually take a look at the supposed weave patterns here, this is a picture where you have actually seen the shroud of a close-up of the shroud weave pattern matched up next to the image on the Codex, which is supposedly the shroud in the image. And they're suggesting that this staggered thing is very unique and supposed to be representative of the weave.
Right. The argument is that the artist was trying to communicate that this is the Shroud of Turin and these are very distinctive weaves. And so his attempt to do that was to draw this zigzag pattern, which would be reminiscent of the herringbone pattern on the shroud. That's the argument. Yep. And in addition to this, kind of hand in hand, they point to the circles there on the left that are in the shape of an L. There's a close-up of them. And they point to some burns, which are in the shape of an L. Don't ignore the one that's not in the corner over there. Ignore that one. Just look at the ones that are the L shape. Definitely don't look at any others. And they happen to be also in an L shape. And so ipso facto, therefore QED, they're the same, right? That's what they're saying.
Yeah, and we're gonna brush by the burn holes fairly fast, right? But this is probably one of the biggest arguments in favor of the Hungarian Codex being the actual
right
shroud,
because if this was distinctive, if this was very unusual for this artist, like there's no reason for him to put circles here, and he chose to do it, that would be a good argument. I'm going to come back. We're going to put a pin in
We'll
that.
get back to the circles. Yeah.
We'll circle back. We will circle back to the circles in just a second. But first, let's just situate this image in its historical context, because I'm not a medieval art historian. I don't look at medieval art all the time. So let's look at some depictions of this scene in medieval art and just see
Yep.
what we're looking at.
So remember, before we do that, we have two separate panes here. So these are two scenes depicted on top of one another. So a lot of the images we look at will not necessarily be both of these things represented. So you see one or the other usually. So if we go to a couple images here, what do we have? We have a tomb with a diagonal shaped sarcophagus or lid, an angel sitting on the tomb, and 3 Marys.
Right. You've got a stone box or a box
Yep.
of some sort, and the lid is a rectangle, kind of at an angle, and the angel's chilling out on it.
He's also pointing, saying, "Hey, look, there's no Jesus in there."
nobody
And
in
you can see in this one, the shroud is kind of like poking out of the tomb, and it's obviously doesn't have a body in it. The one on the right actually has Jesus's body with the shroud. So this person obviously never saw the Shroud of Turin because he put a shroud on the body here.
And not in the way that the Turin shroud would have been.
Exactly. But you do
the
notice
important thing is
yeah.
you've got sarcophagus,
diagonal
rectangle, and
sarcophagus lid.
it's also pretty decorated.
Pretty decorated, yeah. If we go on, here's some more examples. We can see in the left image here, angel sitting on a diagonal lid with.
Yeah, I should say real quick, I realize we also release this audio on Podbean. I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of pictures in this episode. You should probably watch it on YouTube.
Yeah, if you made it this far in the audio only version, I apologize.
You must be super confused. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but then we have to look at pictures. That's the way it is.
So
Anyway,
this image
continue.
has a angel sitting on a diagonal shaped lid.
Yep,
and
more the same.
More the same. Yep. Boom.
You're
all
getting
over
the theme.
frame.
We don't need to beat you to death with it.
Let's go through a couple here so we can
There's
see.
another one looks the same. Another one. You're getting the theme. This is a very common set of images that you see in the Middle Ages.
Wow,
Okay.
that's so weird. There's so many of those that are
Yeah.
very
Over
similar,
and over.
right?
So now, okay, so now we know what medieval artwork looks like, and it's pretty clear it's going on there, sarcophagus lid, whatever. Let's go back to the Codex, and let's see what we see there. So if we pull up the Codex and look at the bottom image, you see, well, that thing there looks kind of like a diagonal rectangle, right? And then the angel is sitting on it, and he's like pointing into the thing. Seems to me that maybe this isn't the shroud at all. Maybe what this is our sarcophagus.
And that's the lid on an angle, which is just like all the other representations that we saw.
So why is it covered with this herringbone, this diagonal pattern? Because it's decorated just like the other ones are decorated. That's why one of them looks one way and one of them looks the other way. So you can clearly visually distinguish which one is which, right?
Yeah.
I think this is even further enhanced if you zoom in a little bit and kind of focus your attention right there in the middle of the diagonal piece that we're identifying as the lid. Because there's something on there that I think is worth looking at. You see that? See that thing? The thing I've outlined in red there? I don't know about you, Jared. That looks kind of like a cloth to me.
You know, I mean, it is. It's like, so when I first looked at this image prior to like actually reading about it, I looked at that and said, "What are they talking about? There's no burn holes on the shroud. The shroud
it's
it's
right
just
there.
right
It's like-
there. Like, what are you
it's like
talking
a
about? There's no
wad of
pattern
cloth.
on it.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on?" Yeah.
Yeah, that little guy. I wouldn't worry about that little guy.
So that's supposed. So that, according to shroud proponents, is not actually the shroud. That's just something else.
The
In
face
fact,
cloth or something.
yeah, I was actually listening to some people talk about this on the YouTubes, and one of the guys was like, "Oh, I don't even know what that is." Like, he didn't even consider that as part of the shroud. He didn't never even crossed his mind. So,
Which, I mean, if again, kind of cast your mind back to the other images, this is exactly what you saw all the time. You saw a lid with a fabric on it that was obviously intended to be the shroud. Like this is what they drew. So I don't know how you could just blithely throw that away. But maybe the reason you throw it away is because of the L-shaped holes that we put a pin in earlier, right? So let's look at that. The argument is that there's no reason why this guy would put circles there. The only reason to put them there is because he was trying to show this burn pattern, right?
yeah, and it matches up in that L shape, right?
So there are in the Codex, there's actually 2 more pictures. I actually found a website that had every page of the Codex, and I found all the pictures. There were 2 of them. Here's one of them, and I've drawn some helpful arrows. You can see
That's a lot of arrows.
a lot of arrows because there's a lot of circles. I tell you what, this artist loved him some circles. It is a circle palooza in this manuscript. This one, and then also the other image, which is Jesus. I guess Jesus being taken down from the cross. Everything that is supposed to look neat and fancy is covered in circles, right? It's like a favorite thing of this guy to do, evidently, to decorate his stuff. So, going back to the Codex, why are there circles there? Because he's trying to make it look fancy. And my dude loves circles. I don't know.
And there's circles all over the place everywhere. Yeah, it makes more sense from an artistic standpoint. Like the guy had like the zigzag stuff. He's like, ooh, that looks kind of blank. Let me put a little circles. And remember, this is a miniature. This is not something that's 8x10 large scale thing. This is a small manuscript.
Right.
So the art style has to be more rudimentary.
And he clearly wasn't an amazing artist anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
this seems to me like pareidolia in action, where the brain will look for patterns that aren't really there. That seems to be really all this is. I mean, and as just an aside, we don't know for sure when the burning of the shroud that made these holes happened. We know that it was there in the 1500s, but before that, we don't know when it showed up. So who knows? But it seems like for the Codex, it seems honestly like a nothing burger to me. There's no thumbs. Okay, Byzantine artists didn't have thumbs sometimes. Whatever, no big deal. The body being naked. Yes, okay, it is naked, point, sure, but that's an artistic choice he could have made. The hands are crossed over. Yes, of course, they're crossed over as groins because you're not going to have Jesus' penis hanging out on your manuscript. And the L-shaped holes and everything, it looks like it's just a sarcophagus lid. That's what it looks like.
There's one other thing on the Codex, though, that is missing had it actually been copied from the shroud that I think is important to bring up. So if we pull back up the image here, what do you notice that is missing here that probably should be on here, Jordan?
An image of Jesus?
Well, the image of Jesus on the shroud, but specifically in the facial hair region of
That's right.
the Jesus.
I forgot about this. We talked about it the first time when we first talked about the Shroud of Turin, way back. That proponents will make a big deal over the fact that Jesus with a beard shows up at a certain time in history. And look, Jesus on the shroud has a beard, and look, this is a beard, and look, they're identical. Except this dude doesn't have a beard. Like he doesn't look anything like the Jesus on the Shroud of Turin. Like that dude doesn't have a beard. I don't know. It's possible that the artist, even if he had seen the Shroud of Turin, decided not to put a beard on the guy. That is possible. But it
there's
seems
a couple other guys in the image that have some pretty decent beards going on.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah.
It seems like a point against it. And on balance, I don't think the Codex is a strong argument.
No.
So that's the first thing. But I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that would push it back, what, like 70 years? They needed to go all the way back to the 1st century, right? So that's not good enough, Like I said at the top, we both looked hard, and we couldn't find a single peer-reviewed source talking about the provenance of the shroud through the ages.
We found a lot of bloggers and historians even talking about it, but nothing
right.
in peer
And
review.
As an important point, there's a difference between a historian pontificating on something and a historian publishing in peer-reviewed literature. A historian can say whatever the heck they want, just when they're just talking, right? Historians can have weird views too, but if they're going to substantiate it with evidence and peer review, it's harder because they have to convince other historians that their view is at least plausible, right? It's going to have to withstand scrutiny. So while if I just, I don't know, say something and then a historian says something, probably the historian's more likely to be right than me. We should really be looking at peer-reviewed literature if we can, and there just isn't any, right? Which to me, it's not definitive proof, but it's not a great sign when someone who has credentials, who is qualified and could publish and presumably knows how to publish, but doesn't publish when it's about their pet theory. So like
Exactly.
these historians, they have published works, they know how peer review works, and yet when it comes to talking about the Shroud of Turin and its history before the 14th century, suddenly they can't do peer review. Now, it doesn't mean they're wrong. That they might just have chosen not to publish in it. But when I see that, it makes me do that Cardi B meme you've seen on TikTok when she's like, "That's suspicious.
That's weird.
That's weird," right? Like that's how I feel when I see them not publishing peer review, right?
Well, especially
My
when you
daughter over there is
consider,
losing
yeah,
it because I mentioned TikTok.
yeah. But especially
Anyway,
when
yeah.
you consider what does get published on, right? Like,
Right.
have you? There's some articles out there that are
Yeah.
published on the weirdest things.
And it's not like, oh, it's on the Shroud of Turin, they wouldn't publish it. My hard drive is fast filling up with Shroud of Turin research. Like this thing is piling up. Journals would
Yeah,
love to have this published. They're just not publishing it. Okay.
yeah.
And maybe the reason they're not publishing it is because historians aren't convinced. They don't find it convincing. Right. So an example that is pointed out was actually pointed out in the comments of the last video was de Wesselow. He is an art historian. He went to school. He actually has a PhD in the subject, and he specializes in medieval history. Awesome, perfect, exactly the type of guy you'd want to look into this. He published his findings, but unfortunately, he published his findings through Amazon, which like anybody could do. I could publish through Amazon if I wanted to. And his book is called The Shroud of Turin and the Secret of the Resurrection. He asserts that the Shroud of Turin is actually another artifact, the image of Edessa, that was kept in Constantinople for centuries. Now, we don't have time to go through his entire argument point by point. I'll just say that it all hinges entirely on the Codex. And we've already talked about that. So if you have to accept the Codex, and it has to be so strong that it is able to substantiate everything else, right? And I just don't think it's that strong. So that's one historian's take on it. Another one that I saw in the blogosphere a lot was pointing out similarities between medieval art and the Shroud of Turin, just like in the way that Jesus is depicted.
Example.
So there's an example. You've got the shroud. Now remember, the person who would be painting this would only have the image on the left.
Yeah, we're
Right.
showing you both here so you can see that. Yeah.
Right. So the things they'll point to are that he has a beard. There's kind of like a similar-ish mark on his forehead, like
Something
the
like
little
on the
U-shaped
brow
thing.
area. Yeah, like a triangular thing there.
Right. Maybe the lines under the eyes or whatever.
The parting of the hair. Sometimes there'll be a depiction with like a little wispy hair. And then the beard is supposedly cleft. So if I just do this to my beard, now I'm Jesus. But this guy doesn't have the cleft in his beard, but this
Well,
guy
maybe.
does.
Yeah.
So
This guy has a major cleft in his beard.
but
His
if you
beard is like
notice,
this.
so they're saying, why would anybody paint the image of Jesus with a beard like that unless they were looking at this image and they didn't realize that light spot there wasn't actually the beard, but like the blood or whatever that was discolored it. But so this is the kind of stuff we're talking. Like, if you go back through history, we could sit here for hours and hours and just pull up images of Jesus throughout history. That does not mean that every single one of those people were looking at the Shroud of Turin and saying, I have to do this
Or
way.
we're talking to someone who had seen the shroud or had heard
Right.
stories of it. Because like we said, there are thousands of pictures of Jesus throughout history. Like Christianity was the dominant religion in Europe
He's probably the most depicted dude in history.
since the 4th century. He's everywhere. And so if you look hard enough, you're gonna find images that look like the Shroud of Turin. You're just going to. There's just so many. Like you couldn't help but find. It's not whether there are similarities between this guy's depiction of a bearded Middle Eastern man and the Shroud's depiction of a bearded Middle Eastern man. The thing that it has to be that the similarities have to be of such a nature that only the Shroud of Turin could plausibly explain it.
Yeah, and there's some people that go off some really crazy things. Like I heard Gary Habermas talking about, like if you look really closely, you can see like coins like on the eyes of Jesus and like an imprint of something. I'm like with Pontius Pilate symbol on there. Like I don't see that in the shroud, but if you see that, great.
I don't think the Shroud's resolution, like it is fine, but it's not like,
yeah,
I don't know that you can like read inscriptions on this thing. That seems like really reaching. Because it's fuzzy and it's hard to see anyway. It's like you can't even see the image if you're too close to it because of how faint it is. Okay. So we're
Enough
not
of
going
that. Yeah.
enough of that. Basically, it's all pareidolia. It's all just looking for trends, and if I have enough of a sample, you're going to find those trends. So this guy isn't a historian, but let's talk about another very popular idea that has circulated for a while. This one, a name that pops up a lot, Ian Wilson. He published a book way back in the 70s, I think. His first
It's
book
like
was in
1979, I think the first book came out. I actually
Right.
tried finding a copy of it at the local library. Unsuccessful.
But He has since updated that book in 2011, The Shroud, Fresh Light on the 2,000-Year-Old Mystery, and I bought it to look through it. Wilson, just some background on him. He studied modern history at Oxford in the late 60s. So far as I can tell, the only published works he has are books on the Shroud, like just for popular audiences that's like nothing peer reviewed, but okay, so he's just a layperson, fine. His theory, which I'm hesitant to even bring it up because we're not going to fully debunk it, but I feel like I have to. I feel like I cannot possibly have read this and not share it with everyone around me, right? So at some point, let us know in the comments if this is something that interests you, if you want us to really dig into this book. We're planning on doing book reviews in 2023, so if you really want to hear it, we'll talk about Ian Wilson's book. But just in brief, his theory is that the Shroud of Turin is the same as the image of Edessa, which was in Constantinople. So there's this thing that is referenced sometimes in history, an image that the Byzantines, and they didn't call themselves the Byzantines. They believed they saw themselves as Roman, just a historical note, but doesn't matter. So they just would show it for devotional purposes. It was a big deal to them. It's
and just real quick, the image of Edessa was supposedly like a cloth that had a depiction of Jesus on it.
Usually his face is what they would talk about, right? So that's where his theory hinges on. But he points out pilgrims to Constantinople list relics that were kept there that they kind of saw or heard about, and they list burial shrouds of Jesus, no image, and then they also separately list artifacts that bear the image of Jesus. So in the minds of these tourists, these pilgrims to Constantinople, these are not the same thing. Burial shrouds, no image. Things with the image, not shrouds. Okay. So in order to overcome this, don't worry, he's got a great explanation. Wilson says, obviously, what happened is the Byzantines, they tricked these tourists. See, they bamboozled them because they used a copy of the Shroud of Turin as a relic. And it's because there were popular stories of Jesus doing like the Forrest Gump thing and like wiping his face with something that has its face on it, and he like hands it like that. And so they knew that this was the image, right? So they had to they didn't want to throw away this legend that they had like going for them. So they made this copy and were like planning on like gradually working in the idea that this image was like on the burial cloth. But I guess they didn't get around to it because Constantinople was sacked. Okay. So that's one thing, but don't worry. There's another gap that needs to explain. See, between the sacking of Constantinople when the image of Edessa is gone from history in the 1200s, very early 1200s, there's a 150-year gap between there and when it shows up in France. Okay. Now, this is a fabulous relic that just disappears from history completely. And so why? Why does no one talk about having this amazing thing for 150 years? Okay. So he tries to play, he puts on his Warner Wallace hat and plays detective for a second. He says, okay, so who could have done this? Let's work up a profile. This had to be kept secret for 150 years. That suggests it couldn't have been an individual because they die, right? So it had to have been a group. This group had to be well disciplined in order to keep a secret of this magnitude. They also had to have a connection to the Crusaders that were in Constantinople, either there themselves or have like a connections with these Crusaders, right? They had to be very wealthy, strongly religious, or both, because they have this priceless artifact, but they didn't sell it. They kept it hidden, right? So that means either they didn't need the money, or they had religious convictions against selling it, or both. Probably both. Okay. So, and lastly, they had to have some connection to the French knightly nobility because it ends up in the hands of a French knight in 1355 or whatever. So, secret group, well-disciplined, Crusaders, wealthy, disciplined, connections to French nobility. Who could this be?
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, none other than the Knights Templar. Yes, that's right. We have this. We don't have time to unravel this rejected Assassin's Creed DLC plot. this like Dan Brown's less popular sequel of an idea. I don't even know what to say about this. So we're not gonna. I just felt like I had to share that with you. I'm not gonna debunk
Yeah.
it, but I felt like you had to share this experience with me.
We need some levity in all this, right? It's a
Okay.
lot of ad hoc, just blah blah blah
Yeah.
on top of it, right?
Okay. Nothing that I'm gonna hang my hats on. Certainly nothing I'm gonna throw away radiocarbon dating for. But
Correct. Yeah. Maybe
what
there is something we could throw radiocarbon dating away for, and that's something a little more scientific.
what about the pollen? Let's
What
talk about the
about the
pollen.
pollen?
So
So,
you've probably heard this. I know I've seen it in the comments of both videos. So let's talk about it. There's pollen on the Shroud of Turin. This pollen tests were done by Swiss criminologist. His name was Max Frey-Sulzer. I believe he had a PhD, but he was a criminologist. And there's him looking super happy about. He apparently was like part of pioneering this tape collection method. That was his contribution to history. But he's super stoked about using tape to
he's the
pull
first
stuff off.
person to invent the lint rollers.
Right. So what his claim to fame is, for in this context anyway, is that he took those samples and he looked under them in a microscope and he identified some pollen. Even more than that, he identified that there was pollen. He said that he identified all the way down to the specific species of pollen, and that these species were plants that are now extinct. They grew exclusively in Palestine during the time of Christ. And I forget the exact number. I want to say it's like 40 something. It was many different species
Right.
that he identified.
So, first of all, was Frey a botanist?
He was not. That's a great question. He was a criminologist, in case you
Hmm.
forgot when I said that 10 seconds ago. Were you not listening, Jared?
I'm sorry.
No.
I was just wondering how a criminologist was able to identify this pollen as
I
being
guess
from
I guess he's a botanist
Palestine.
on
And
the weekends.
okay.
I don't know.
Oh.
So, okay. So, yes, he was not a botanist. Okay. According to actual botanists, you very rarely can identify pollen all the way down to the species. I've looked into some botany papers as in preparation for this, and I found one by an actual set of botanists. The M. Boy paper. The publisher of that boy is in the paper that we have referenced in the description. Check that out. They are arguing in favor of the shroud being an ancient burial shroud. So this isn't like a hostile witness who doesn't believe like this is fake, right? This is someone who
Right.
thinks it's authentic, but they're saying they identify different species groups than Frey did. So they don't claim to get down to the species level. They're like, not only can we not get to the species level, they're different groups. And they identify them with like burial stuff. We won't get into that. But basically, Frey's entire argument doesn't make sense. He wasn't he wasn't qualified to make it. It contradicts what actual botanists say. Boy said that the possibility of being able to pinpoint the geographical origin of the shroud has been ruled out. It doesn't get much more
Doesn't much more
unequivocal
clear
than
cut
that.
than that. Yeah.
Right.
And if we just think about this for a second, this shroud was taken around everywhere, displayed by everyone and their mother out there. Is it possible that pollen could have got on it in its travels? Yes, but even then, we wouldn't have been able to date it to that certain time. So this is just a
Even if so, if you had pollen that could only have been there in first century Judea, maybe you'd have some kind of argument. But that's not the case. That's certainly not the case. So what you have maybe is pollen from some areas. So all that tells you is that either the shroud was in that area or pollen from that area got on the shroud. But like again, you can't get down to the specific species. Plants that cover a wide geographical area have pollen that all kind of looks the same. So this is not credible.
one of the other things that is supposedly credible about the shroud is the weaving technique. So you've probably heard this if you've ever done any research on it. The shroud has a 3/1 herringbone twill weave. This is so incredible because it proves that it had to come from somebody who was wealthy, and it means that Joseph of Arimathea would have been the only person able to afford this shroud. It also
Wealthy and in the first century.
in the first century, because this weave is only used in the first century in Judea. These are claims. I'm not making these claims, by the way, but these are claims that
we've
you will
heard.
hear. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's the claim. In fact, the weave was so important apparently that it shows up in art all over the place, shows up in the Codex, whatever. So the question is it actually, in fact, that distinctive and isolated to the first century? So again, we see a lot of blog posts. We see a lot of like Christian websites. There's not a lot of peer review on this, right? There's not a lot of textile experts talking about this. To the extent we do have textile experts, so far as I can tell, they don't substantiate this claim.
Yeah. I want to shout out to Hugh Ferry, who is actually commented on some of our videos and pointed out some places where we could have been a little more articulate and a little more precise. We really appreciate that and pointing us in the right direction. His site was a good source of information for some of these things because he does something that I wish more people did, which is cite his sources.
Crazy.
Which means we don't have to take him for face value. He's done a lot of the dirty work of like collecting things on some of these things. And then you can say, oh, let's see what that person says. Let's see what that person, and you can follow that rabbit trail all the way back to the original source.
So in this rabbit trail, Gilbert Raes, who's a textile expert, he published an article called The Textile Study of 1973 to 74.
He was on the STERP team.
And as part of this thing, he said, here's a quote from that paper: "The weave used for this fabric does not present any particular characteristics and does not allow a determination of the period of manufacture. In view of these observations, one can say that we have no precise indication permitting us to affirm with certainty that the fabric does not date from the time of Christ. It is, however, equally true that there is nothing that would permit us to state that the manufacture of this fabric was affected in that period." Basically, you can't tell anything at all about the time of manufacture from this pattern, is what he's saying. And he's a textile expert.
Well, that's it. Pretty much clear cut right there, right? So
another one, Gilbert Vial, wrote an article titled "Shrouded in Mystery." Very clever. And he published this. It was a textile magazine.
It's a textile magazine. I actually tried to find the article like in a PDF version, but this is a magazine for people who sell rugs, or they talk about ancient weave patterns. They talk about all kinds of stuff related to textiles. So
not peer reviewed.
Not peer reviewed. No.
Take with some salt, but at least somebody who's allegedly knows what they're talking about. So what he said was that he looked at errors in the weave, and you could see that there were mistakes in the weaving pattern of the shroud, right? And in his opinion, this meant that it was based on the pattern he was seeing. He believed it was produced on a 4-shaft loom.
Yeah. And how he came to that conclusion was basically he looked at the errors that were made in a repetitive pattern. And so if you had like you're doing the 4s on a newer style loom, if you pick up the 4 and you lay down 1, and the next time you only pick up 3 and you lay down another one because you're stacking up stuff in here, you're basically going to make these mistakes pretty fast because the new style loom is much more efficient at putting the weaves together. Whereas an old hand style loom that wasn't mechanical like this, the weaver would have caught their mistakes and would have been able to fix them much more easily. So by having these errors in there, it actually allows us to determine what kind of loom it was made on, which is pretty cool.
In his opinion, it was made on a loom that was invented in the late Middle Ages. And
right around the time that the shroud showed up in history.
Yeah.
Okay, weird.
About the time that French knight showed up. So
yeah,
this is just the opinion of a textile expert, not peer reviewed, just an opinion. But on the other side, all we've got is opinions too. So I don't know. Again, kind of a wash. Okay. That's the weave. There's one last piece. We're going on like 45 minutes. So there's one last piece I want to talk about. And this is about the body proportions. Okay. There's a lot of ink spilled about how this perfectly matches a crucified man. That's a whole other can of worms. That there's so much that we have to cut out to actually fit these in the hour so that we're doing. So
and somebody in the comments will be like, but you didn't cover this. So that proves that it's the Shroud of Turin. It's
or you're being disingenuous because you didn't cover my favorite piece of evidence. Like, man, I've only got so much time. Okay. So if you want to tell us how disingenuous we are for not covering your favorite piece of evidence, put it in the comments. But in any case, one thing that I hear from skeptics a lot is about the body proportions. So I heard some people talk about how the arms are kind of an unnatural spot for a body that's like laying on the ground. They're covering his genitals, as we've spent way too much time talking about, but that's kind of awkward. And I actually ran a scientific test myself. I laid down And it is pretty awkward to cover your genitals like that when you're laying down. You have to exert continuous force. So it's not a natural resting place. That would be like more on your stomach. Now, maybe there's an explanation for this. I didn't see a proponent make an explanation. I don't know if like they held his arms there until rigor mortis set in, or maybe that's how bodies end up in rigor mortis. I don't know. I couldn't find a refutation for it. Take that for what you will. I don't put a ton of stock into it, but there it is. More importantly, though, that led me to another claim that the arms are significantly out of whack on Turin Man, on this Jesus.
Yeah. At first glance, when you just look at the image, it looks like a dude, right? You're not really like looking at the proportions, right?
So the claim is twofold. One, that one arm is significantly shorter than the other, and also that both arms together are freakishly long. Okay.
Like really long.
Like really long. So I saw this among other places that I saw this claim. I saw it on Rational Wiki, which immediately makes me extremely suspicious because Rational Wiki is a terrible source that nobody should ever use. So that definitely made me take stock. So I decided I'd check it myself. So what I did was I started with an image of Turin Man, and I'm going to compare the arms. So I drew what I thought was about a horizontal on the shoulders. It actually doesn't matter exactly where on the shoulders it lands. All that matters is you're measuring the same relative position, right? Because if the arms were proportional, they should measure the same no matter where you start, right?
Yeah, as long as you're somewhat close to each thing.
As long as you're, horizontal on both. So I drew a horizontal line there so I could make sure I got the thing right. I then scaled the body. The actual scale, again, doesn't matter. We're only comparing proportions, right? So don't worry about the actual measurements. It's just relative size. All right. So I measured the left arm, the one on the left of the image, which is the person's right arm. Okay. And I measured all the way to his fingertips to his shoulder. Okay. And it came with 87.3 centimeters. Again, don't put stock in the actual number. The important
somebody's going to get hung up on that.
87.3 units. It's a dimensionless number. Okay. Just 87.3. It's all that matters. Then I looked at the left arm. The left arm is 72.7. That is way shorter. Like way shorter. That's like almost 6 inches difference. 16% shorter. Now, granted, I was kind of clicking manually, kind of eyeballing it. Maybe it's not perfect, maybe the perspective is a little weird. Still, even if you gave it a 10% difference, it's still very different. And they're usually like exactly the same on an actual human body, right? I thought, well, maybe like because it's allegedly a 3-dimensional body, right? So maybe like the way he has his arms, like they're all scrunched up, but that would make it worse because you'd have to unscrunch them, I checked out this statue that was made by Fanti. It didn't look like there was anything with the way the arms were laying that would make this thing invalid. And then I scoured the internet to try to find anybody debunking this claim, and I couldn't find anybody. So I don't know, maybe there's an answer. I wish I'd accessed this statue to measure it. Whatever. Possibly his left arm is significantly shorter than his right. Now, the next one, another claim that's made by skeptics is that Jesus' arms overall are super weirdly long. He has a big wingspan. So usually if you put your arms all the way out and measured from fingertip to fingertip, that length is equal to your height. Okay, very close.
So, yep.
Yeah, very close to your height. There's some variants, like if some big time players in the NBA have like a 1.1 ratio where they have like freakishly long arms. Okay. And if you actually measure Jesus as a flat image there on the shroud, if you just take scale and measure, it's about 1.1. So it does look like he has freakishly long arms. However, what shroud proponents say is that he's not laying flat in the image. He's actually kind of curled up. Like that, right? And so what I did was I did some measurements. I looked at the projection length, right? Like if you just project it down, and then I measured the length along the body to get his true height from ankles to top of the forehead, or top of the head rather. That ratio is 1.12. I did some math, and if you scale with that scrunched up body, then the arm wingspan is about the same as his height. So it doesn't appear that claim actually holds up. Wanted to put that in there because it's common among skeptics, and we want to correct skeptics too. We're not here to just take shots at the Shroud of Turin. We want to make sure we give good information. So possibly left arm shorter than the right. Maybe some funky things going on with the perspective. I don't know. It didn't seem like it was, but maybe. But the wingspan thing doesn't hold up.
Cool.
And
Well,
there you go.
Yeah. Yeah, that one is kind of out there for me. Like I could see it. Like it just looks weird, but we're not saying that just because that is, it's not authentic, right?
The argument is that it's made by an artist and he had to make his arms weirdly long in order to cover the genitals. That's the argument that's made. I don't know if that's a great argument, but now you have the information. So with that, we're done. We have finished episode 3. We are done with the Shroud of Turin. We're complete. To sum up all 3 episodes, is the Shroud of Turin authentic? I think the preponderance of the evidence says no. I think that the radiometric dating should not be rejected out of hand. I've seen several people, Rucker is one of them, who says because the dates are discordant, they don't match exactly, we should just reject it. Which, when the literature says reject it, what they're saying is we can't use this to say when it was made, like it was made at this decade or that decade or that decade. You can't. However, there's a big difference between we should not use it to determine exactly what decade it was made and it was made in the 1st century, right? And so the radiometric dating combined with the flimsy nature, that in some cases ridiculous nature of the evidence from history and the explanations that require a dematerializing body with a cloud of neutrons and protons, it's nuts. It's ad hoc and it is not necessary to explain what we see. And so while we can't say for sure how the image was formed, that's a big question mark. Doesn't seem like it's authentic.
And even if we could prove that the Shroud of Turin was from the 1st century and it originated in Judea, Palestine, that tells us nothing about whether or not the dude on the shroud is Jesus and that it's the result of a flippin' miracle.
Right. I mean, there were other crucified people, a lot of crucified people, in fact, in the 1st century. Now, I will give them this, though. It is a crucified man from the 1st century, all beaten up and everything. So that is at least more than nothing. It's not, it is not nothing, right?
It's not like he had like a nameplate on his chest that said, I am Jesus, right?
But I'll concede that certainly like the case for Jesus' resurrection is better off having an authentic shroud than not.
Sure.
I'll give him that for sure. Unless and until, though, we could definitively prove that the shroud was miraculous, the image, I don't know, does not equal God did it. So,
and as skeptics, we are fine saying, I don't know. And we shouldn't say, like, well, maybe it is and go with it.
Yeah. So I'm curious, though, like we've done just so much research on this. Was there anything that stuck out to you? What was the thing that made you think the most?
So for me, the thing that stuck out the most that I still trying to wrap my head around was how was the image made? Like, and I think I know why this is for me, but I also think I understand why the shroud is so alluring to people. It's because it's a mystery. People love mysteries. And like
they both love mysteries and hate mysteries because they want an answer.
Exactly, yeah. I want an answer.
The human mind abhors a vacuum. And if they can't come up with a good theory, they'll come up with a conspiracy theory, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I agree that the image, I don't know how it was made. I have no idea. Like, there are certain things that I'm pretty sure it wasn't, but I don't know how it was. On that, I'm also on the image, specifically on the evidence against just like paint. Because like when I was coming into this at first, there's an image on there, dates of the 14th century. Okay, probably some artist painted it or something like that. That would have been my guess to start with before I looked at anything. But there actually seems to be a fair amount of disconfirming evidence to just like a guy with a brush. It doesn't have any fibers like stuck together from any kind of liquid. There's no meniscus marks where like the liquid would have stopped flowing, so it would like
doesn't
stop
go
there.
into the creases and all that stuff. Like
doesn't go into the creases. How fuzzy and like how blurry it is. Like so, it'd be very difficult for an artist who is like actually painting. You'd have to like it would be difficult to maintain that perspective. So it'd be a trap. None of this shows that an artist did not do it, but it shows that he probably, if an artist did do it, it probably wasn't with paint. It would have to be something more sophisticated, and it would be difficult, way more difficult than just like whipping up an image, right? So,
but that doesn't mean that we won't find out next week, that it was done, or we find another shroud image. It doesn't matter.
We'll see. So, bottom line, we don't know how the image was made, but to the extent we have evidence, it's 14th century, and if it's not first century, it can't be Jesus.
Yep. That's
Okay.
it.
So, if you think we got something wrong, I know you're going to do it because I've seen you do it for the last month. Please leave in a comment. I'd like to thank everybody who's here now. We got a bunch of new subscribers. So, hi. We don't just do Shroud of Turin videos, believe it or not. I know that's all you've seen in the last month, but we do videos on all kinds of skepticism. So, we're going to be doing different stuff in the next couple weeks. We're going to take a break from the Shroud of Turin, but let us know what you want us to talk about. Since you've made it all the way to the end, you're going to be rewarded with our fallacy of the day, which actually I'd like to crowdsource a different name for because we're kind of like running out of fallacies. We've been doing this for a while now, so
we're starting to recycle some fallacies, and there's only so many fallacies.
There's only so many, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a better name for like a kind of thing related to skepticism and doubt that could be a fallacy or just a thing in argumentation you see, I don't know.
Think
Tell
like
us in the
Sesame
comments.
Street letter of the day kind of thing,
Right.
but for
Tell us in the
skeptics.
comments what you think it should be. But we're going to call it fallacy of the day until we have a better name. So today's fallacy of the day is the bullshit asymmetry principle, otherwise known as Brandolini's law. And we have been beating our face against Brandolini's law for the last month.
Yeah, so Brandolini's law is basically states that the amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is in order of magnitude bigger than that needed to produce it.
Right.
So
it is trivially easy to come up with bullshit. It is so easy to just like throw an explanation out there. And it is often very difficult to actually refute these kind of things. And so I say this as a word of caution. First of all, it is not your responsibility as a skeptic to refute every claim, right? You should start at a position of doubt, a virtuous doubt. You don't want to get to extreme skepticism where it becomes like conspiracy theory nonsense, right? But a position of virtuous skepticism, position of doubt based on your background knowledge. And if a new claim is provided and they can't provide evidence for that claim, then the appropriate thing to do is to reject it or withhold judgment until there is evidence, right?
yeah, this is very similar to like a Gish-Gallop technique, but I'd say on a much lower level because you're literally it's just BS.
It's
just
not
throwing it out there.
necessarily a BS machine gun. Like the
Yeah.
Gish-Gallop is like Brandolini's law in hyperdrive because not only do you throw out nonsense claims, you just keep throwing them out. And because like, oh, well, I made 100 claims, he only refuted one. Well, that's because it took me 40 minutes to refute your one stupid claim. Okay. So that's the bullshit asymmetry principle. Also, kind of in reverse, if you throw something out at somebody like, hey, have you thought of this? Keep in mind, even if it's not bullshit, even if it is just like a legitimate claim, it's going to take more energy for someone to look into it than it was for you to just say it. So it's always okay to say, I don't know, and I'll have to look into it more later. That's a perfectly legitimate answer for you to give, and it's also a legitimate answer for you to receive. So
it's also okay to say, I don't know, and I don't care, and I don't feel like looking into it.
That's also fine too. You have finite time on this planet.
Yeah.
But we won't say that because I don't know, we hate ourselves, masochists.
Because we have reason to doubt everything. So.
Yeah, there you go. That's until next time, you always have reason to doubt. Thank God we're done with the Shroud of Turin.
Peace out.